Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. As we've mentioned here before, education advocates are calling for school districts across the state to be funded by $3.8 billion that they are owed in foundation money. In addition to having that money funded to schools over the span of 3 years, the New York State Association of School Business Officials are also proposing an update to the foundation aid formula, which is nearly a decade old. Here to discuss that proposal is Michael Borges of the aforementioned group. Michael, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, updating the foundation aid formula, kind of politically tricky.
Not really. What we're calling for really is minor adjustments and tweaks to improve the foundation aid formula so it can operate in a way that delivers aid to those school districts that need it the most. So we're not talking about a complete overhaul. We're talking about minor enhancements, adjustments, updating the data to make sure that it's working the way it was intended.
But if you're going to be opening up the foundation aid formula, I can imagine Senator so-and-so, Assembly person so-and-so may be interested in saying, well, how can we tweak this even further? And then you kind of get a pile-on, if you will, and then you could eventually, get to that overhaul of the foundation aid formula, and it could become a real fight. Is that a possibility?
In my experience dealing with the legislature, they're not overly fond of wholesale change. They are more incremental change. And so I think if they make any changes, and I hope they will, and I think they're leaning in that direction, that the change will be incremental and that it'll be in small enough portions that it can be easily digested by both the legislature and public schools.
And how should this formula be changed in order to benefit school districts? Should it be done in such a way that benefits small city school districts that have come up over the last several years in terms of just their fair share from Albany? Should it be benefiting rural suburban districts? Who should benefit from this? Ultimately?
Well, our school aid proposal calls for a $1.9 billion increase overall in school aid, with another $157 million in targeted aids for career and technical education, updating school nutrition, reimbursement rates, things like that. And it also calls for and builds into, like you said, a phase-in of the foundation aid formula. That foundation aid formula is supposed to drive money to high-need school districts, those school districts that need it the most. So, whether it's school districts out in the rural parts of the state or in the big cities, in the big four, those are the kinds of school districts that would benefit from a fully phasing in of the foundation aid formula. On the reciprocal end of that, we are also continuing hold harmless. So many of those school districts that would lose money potentially from a phase-in of the foundation aid formula would not lose any funding by going in that direction. So everybody stands to benefit from our school aid proposal.
Looking forward to the budget season, which we're rapidly approaching, there was a mid-year budget report from the Division of Budget that was released yesterday afternoon that shows some choppy financial waters heading our way in terms of the personal income tax revenue really slowing down. They're now revising some of the projections that we're due to get from that money. We are facing a deficit in the coming fiscal year. Are you concerned at all about what this could mean for education spending in the new budget?
Well, definitely. I mean, the state's resources are limited, and they can't print money. So we try to make our proposals as realistic as can be, but also balance that with the needs of schools. And so, which is why we're calling for a 3-year phase-in of the foundation aid formula, not $3.8 billion all at once.
But it's not just this coming fiscal year that we're going to see these deficits. Right, it is over the next several fiscal years that we are seeing increasing budget gaps.
Right, and there's going to be competition for scarce resources, and we realize that. And so we're hoping that the legislature takes into consideration what our needs are and what their resources are, and comes out with a balanced approach. There are other ways to help schools. Mandate relief is something that the legislature really hasn't dealt with a lot lately, and the governor hasn't really touched since he created Tier 6, good 6 years ago. So, if you can give us more money, there are other ways to help schools become more cost-effective and efficient with their current resources.
Well, one of those ways that's been discussed by education groups, unions, you name it, has been to change the property tax cap, make it that hard 2% and the linkage to inflation. Is that realistic at all, considering the Senate Republican opposition to making any tax cap changes, and especially the opposition from Governor Cuomo to making any tax cap changes?
Well, again, the legislature did agree and passed a legislation that was signed into law that allowed certain tweaks to happen to the tax cap back in 2015.
Right, really around the edges, though.
Yes,
I think there was like payment in lieu of taxes.
Yeah, and again, incremental change.
Yeah,
So it wasn't a wholesale change. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, unfortunately, there was language in that left to the discretion of the Tax and Finance Commissioner to implement those minor changes, which would have been an improvement. So we're hoping that the legislature at least deals with that this coming session and includes that in the budget so that it actually does happen. And going to a flat 2%, everybody believes it's a 2% tax cap, so why not just go to a 2% tax cap? And that will actually help a lot of school districts become less reliant on state aid. As state aid becomes more scarce, those school districts who can tap into their local tax bases for additional resources will actually help the situation in terms of allocating more school aid for those school districts who need it the most.
I mean, school aid has, to be fair to the legislature and the governor, has increased pretty steadily over 6%. The last couple of years. Have school districts been able to build up rainy day reserves, rainy day funds at all?
Yes, I mean, we are finally, I think, almost back to where we were pre-recession in terms of staffing and programmings and things like that. And that's why we hate to see any reductions in funding, and why we want to go to full phase-in of the foundation aid, so we can continue that progress, continue the restoration of the programs and the staffing that got gutted during the Great Recession and during the GEA. So yes, we have built up our reserves. Some school districts, again, are still teetering on the brink, but overall, I think school districts are in a better place than they were 3 or 4 years ago.
I know school districts aren't going to be able to make any decision about what their budget's going to look like until they figure out what the state budget is going to look like. But I was talking to Comptroller Tom DiNapoli a couple of weeks ago, and he predicted, because of the uncertain revenue picture right now with tax collections, because of the coming budget deficits, that you could see a number of school districts increasingly try to override that tax cap. Do you expect that to happen?
Well, the trend has been, last year it was the second highest number of overrides since the inception of the tax cap. So there has been a trend. I think when school districts do a good job of communicating their needs to their local communities, the communities respond with overrides. So again, you could see, if there's less state aid this year than there was last year, you could see more overrides. So the more school aid there is, the less need to override the tax cap, the less need to raise taxes more than they have to. And so it really depends on the legislature providing that, and the governor providing the sufficient funding.
Just ultimately, how important was it getting rid of that gap elimination adjustment?
Oh, it's huge.
I mean, there was a lot of. I mean, that was again, we're talking incremental. That was a 2-year project ultimately, but in terms of getting rid of the GEA, how have school districts been able to kind of bounce back from that?
Well, the GEA, especially the last year, was kind of heavily loaded towards average need and low need school districts. So Long Island and Westchester and pockets upstate New York. So we couldn't get past to doing foundation aid until GEA was done. So now that GEA has been eliminated,
right? It's a little redundant.
Yeah, a little bit redundant. Yeah, but now we have to focus on the foundation aid. So that was the always stumbling block. As long as GEA was in the room, we could never talk about fully phasing in the foundation aid and tweaking foundation aid. So I'm really appreciative that the GEA was done away with. So now we can focus on foundation aid and drive more of that money to those school districts that need it the most.
I'm just curious just how the relationship has been with John Flanagan, if only because, one, the guy has an education background as the former chairman of the Senate Education Committee, and secondly, he's a Long Island Republican, and I don't say the knock on Long Island Republicans, but what has been kind of they've been known for is making sure a lot of the aid, a lot of the money and resources for education gets sent down to Long Island school districts, perhaps at the expense of some upstate New York school districts. Have you seen Flanagan as kind of a fair-minded education policy-based guy?
Yeah, I mean, I have a great working relationship with the senator. I think I wanted to commend him for doing away with the GEA. I mean, he came out first with his statement about not leaving Albany unless the GEA was done last year. And so, again, he has a great understanding of education and the foundation aid formula, and we look forward to working with him as well as Speaker Heastie in the upcoming legislative session.
Okay, we'll leave it there then. Michael Borges, thanks very much for your time this
Thank you
evening.
for having me.
Appreciate it.